I never expected that paying for a stranger's medicine would save my life. But when that elderly man gripped my arm at the pharmacy and whispered, "Don't rake your garden after your son leaves," something in his urgent tone made me listen. The next morning, when I looked out my front door, I was shocked to see what those leaves had revealed. Only then did I understand that warning had kept me alive. My name is Andrew Crawford, and I'm 62 years old. This story began on a Sunday afternoon in early October, though I didn't know it yet. I'd been living on my 120-acre farm in Kansas for the past 15 years, ever since I retired from construction work. Built half the houses in Douglas County during my 30 years as a foreman, but this land was always the dream. My wife Barbara and I bought it when I turned 47, planning for the day I could hang up my hard hat and work the soil instead. Barbara passed 3 years ago, leaving a quietness in the house I'd never gotten used to. Some mornings I still brewed 2 cups of coffee before catching myself. The grief had dulled to a manageable ache, but evenings were still hard. That particular Sunday, my son Charles had stopped by the farm after work. He's 38 now, married to Alice, and they've been struggling financially. Charles works in sales, or tries to, but he's never been good with money. Always chasing the next big opportunity, the sure thing that never quite pans out. We sat on the porch, sharing a beer, while the sun painted the cornfields gold. Charles seemed nervous, kept checking his phone, shifting in his chair like he couldn't get comfortable. "Dad," he finally said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I hate to ask, but I'm in a tight spot. Need about $15,000 to cover some debts, just until I close this big deal next month." $15,000 wasn't a small amount, but I'd worked my whole life to be able to help my son when he needed it. Barbara would have wanted that. "What kind of debts?" I asked. He waved his hand dismissively. "Credit cards, mostly. You know how it is. Everything's so expensive these days." Something felt off about his answer, but he was my son. I wrote him the check right there, watched him fold it into his wallet with that smile that reminded me so much of his mother. He hugged me before leaving, held on maybe a second longer than usual. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, son." 3 days later, on Wednesday morning, Charles called to say he'd swing by that evening to pick up some tools he'd left in the barn. Said he was starting a new project and needed his socket set. I thought it was nice that he was staying busy, keeping his hands occupied. Construction work teaches you that idle hands lead to trouble. That same afternoon, I was making my regular trip into Lawrence to pick up my heart medication. The drive took 30 minutes along County Road 47, past fields getting ready for harvest. Baxter's Pharmacy sat on Massachusetts Street, the same place I'd been coming for years. Dorothy worked the counter now, a sweet girl in her 30s with practical brown hair. The bell chimed as I walked in. One customer stood at the counter ahead of me, an elderly man, maybe mid-70s, wearing a faded jacket. His hair was shock white, his frame thin but not frail. He stood very still as Dorothy rang up his prescription. "That'll be 63.88, Mr. Grayson," Dorothy said. The old man opened a worn leather wallet and counted out bills. 20, 10, 5, more singles. He counted again, slower this time, then looked up with defeat in his eyes. "I'm short 8.50, he said quietly. "I thought Medicare was supposed to cover this." "There's a coverage gap this month," Dorothy explained gently. "I'm sorry. Do you want me to put it back?" "It's insulin," he said. "I need it today." Before I could think twice about it, I stepped forward. "Excuse me, I'd like to cover that for him." Both of them turned to look at me. Dorothy smiled. The old man's eyes went wide, an unusual shade of blue, pale, almost gray, but clear and sharp as winter ice. Sir, I couldn't, he said. It's no trouble at all, I replied, pulling out my wallet. We all need help sometimes. Dorothy rang up both transactions, his insulin and my heart medication. I handed her my card, and she processed the payment. Thank you, the old man said, clutching the small white bag. I'll pay you back when I can. No need. Just take care of yourself. He started toward the door, then stopped. He turned back and walked straight to me, his gait steady despite his age. He reached out and gripped my forearm with surprising strength. His fingers were cold through my shirt sleeve. He leaned close, so close I could smell coffee on his breath. After your son leaves tonight, he said, each word deliberate. Don't rake the garden. Let the leaves lie where they fell. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? Sorry. His grip tightened. Don't rake the leaves. Promise me. The intensity in his gaze made something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't the rambling of a confused old man. This was specific. This was a warning. Okay, I heard myself say. He held my gaze another moment, then released my arm and walked away. The bell chimed as he pushed through the door, and just like that, he was gone. I stood there, arm tingling where he'd gripped it, trying to process what had just happened. Mr. Crawford, Dorothy's voice brought me back. Are you all right? That man, do you know him? She glanced at her computer screen. Daniel Grayson. He's been coming here for a few months. Lives out on Route 12. Has he ever seemed strange to you? He's always been perfectly normal when I've dealt with him, Dorothy said. Quiet, polite. Why? No reason, I said quickly. Just curious. But it wasn't curiosity that had my mind racing as I walked back to my truck. It was the specificity of Daniel Grayson's words. After your son leaves tonight, how did this stranger know Charles was coming to see me tonight? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Charles himself had only called this morning. And the leaves. What did fallen leaves have to do with anything? That evening, just after sunset, Charles's silver sedan pulled into my driveway. I was sitting on the porch, Daniel's warning still fresh in my mind. I'd been there for the better part of an hour, nursing a beer I hadn't really wanted. The October air had that bite to it that promised frost before dawn. Charles's headlights swept across the porch as he pulled up next to my truck. The door opened, and there was my boy, 38 years old, but still looking like he was trying to impress someone. Dark slacks, button-down shirt, hair styled with gel. He carried a leather overnight bag. Hey, Dad, he said, climbing the steps with easy confidence. Mind if I crash here tonight? Got an early start tomorrow. Figured it'd be easier than driving back to Topeka. Course not, I replied, gesturing to the cooler. Beer's cold if you want one. Sure. He grabbed a bottle, twisted the cap, took a long pull. Then he leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkening fields. Beautiful night. They usually are this time of year. I studied him. He seemed tense, though he was trying to hide it, kept shifting his weight, checking his phone. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to crickets tune up their evening song. Then Charles pushed off the railing and looked down at the yard. Man, those leaves are really piling up, he said casually. You want me to rake them before it gets dark? Won't take long. My hand tightened around the beer bottle. No need, I'll get to it. Come on, Dad. There's got to be 4 inches of leaves down there. He gestured at the yard. You leave them much longer, they'll kill the grass underneath, smother it. He wasn't wrong. That was exactly what happened if you let leaves sit too long. It was the kind of thing every farmer knew, the kind of thing I'd taught Charles when he was 12. I know, I said slowly, but I'm not ready to deal with them yet. It'll take me 20 minutes. I've got time before I head inside. Charles, I kept my voice level. I appreciate the offer, but I'll handle it when I'm ready. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw confusion flicker across his face. This wasn't like me. I'd always been the type to stay on top of maintenance. Letting the leaves sit made no sense from his perspective. Okay, he said finally. Your call. But there was something in his eyes, a flash of frustration maybe, that made me think of Daniel Grayson's urgent grip on my arm. Let me grab those tools, I said, standing. We walked across the yard together, leaves crunching under our boots. The barn door creaked as I pulled it open. I found the socket set on the workbench right where it always was. Here you go, I said, handing it over. Thanks, Dad. Charles took the case, tucked it under his arm. Then he paused. Hey, I know I've been asking a lot of you lately. The money, the tools. I just want you to know I'm good for it. I'm going to pay you back and then some. I know you will, son. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I hugged him back, feeling the familiar shape of him. Taller than me now by a couple inches, broader through the shoulders. My boy grown into a man I sometimes didn't quite recognize. Love you, Dad, he said into my shoulder. Love you too. He held on maybe a second longer than usual, then released me and stepped back. I'll be gone early. Don't want to wake you. We went inside. Charles settled into the guest room while I cleaned up the dinner dishes. Around 10 p.m., I heard his car start up. Through the kitchen window, I watched his taillights disappear down County Road 47. Thought it was strange he'd leave after making such a point about staying overnight, but maybe he'd gotten a call, changed his plans. I went to bed, but couldn't sleep. Something about the evening felt off. Charles's insistence about the leaves, the way he'd gripped that hug, the fact that he'd left after all. Around midnight, I heard a vehicle coming up the drive. Figured Charles had come back after all, maybe forgotten something. I almost got up to check, but exhaustion finally won out. Thursday morning broke cold and clear. I woke at my usual time, 5:30 a.m., but instead of my normal routine, I found myself drawn to the front window. What I saw there made my blood run cold. 2 distinct tire tracks cut through the carpet of leaves in my front yard, clear as if someone had painted them there. They ran from the gate, curved around the side of the house, and disappeared toward the back garden. In the early morning light, with frost beginning to glitter on the grass beneath, those tracks stood out like wounds. I was down the stairs and out the front door in less than a minute, not bothering with coffee or my jacket. The October air bit through my flannel shirt, but I barely noticed. My breath came out in white puffs as I stood at the edge of the porch, staring. Tire tracks, clear as day. The leaves had done exactly what Daniel Grayson must have known they would do. They'd stuck to the tires of whatever vehicle had come through here, adhering to the rubber and creating 2 parallel paths where the leaves had been pulled away. The tracks were roughly 6 feet apart, consistent with a sedan or small SUV. I followed them slowly, my boots crunching on undisturbed leaves to either side. The vehicle had entered through the gate, which I always left unlocked, and driven straight up toward the house. Then it had turned, following the path around to the back where my garden sat. That's where the real story began to emerge. The tracks stopped at the garden's edge, near the old split rail fence that marked the boundary of my property. Here the vehicle had idled for some time. I could tell from how the leaves had been blown back by the exhaust, creating a small clearing. And here, too, were footprints. Boot prints, size 11 or 12 if I was any judge. 2 sets of them, both male based on the depth and stride. They'd walked from the vehicle to the fence, then back again multiple times. The soil near the fence had been disturbed, freshly turned, though someone had tried to smooth it over again. The disturbed area was maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, like someone had been digging or burying something, but there was nothing there now except freshly turned earth that someone had attempted to disguise. Then I saw the fence. The split-rail fence was old. I'd built it myself 20 years ago, and it had weathered to a silvery gray that blended with the landscape. But one section, about 4 feet long, looked different. The wood was the same weathered gray, but the joints were wrong. I ran my fingers along the joint and felt the rough edge of a fresh cut. Someone had sawed through the rails, then put them back together with cheap L-brackets you could buy at any hardware store. It was a decent patch job if you weren't looking closely. But I'd built this fence with my own hands. I knew every inch of it. Someone had cut through my fence, done something in my garden in the middle of the night, then poorly repaired it and driven away. My phone came out of my pocket almost without conscious thought. I wasn't good with technology, but I knew how to take pictures. I documented everything. The tire tracks cutting through the leaves, the boot prints in the soil, the disturbed earth, the fresh saw marks on the fence. Each photo felt like evidence in a case I didn't yet understand. As I stood there in my garden, staring at those tracks, Daniel Grayson's words suddenly made perfect sense. Don't rake the garden. Let the leaves lie where they fell. If I'd listened to Charles last night, if I'd raked up those leaves like any sensible farmer would do, these tracks would be invisible, gone. Whatever had happened here would have left no trace at all. The vehicle could have driven over bare grass, and I'd never have known it had been here. Daniel had known someone was coming. He'd known they would drive onto my property, and he'd known that those leaves were the only thing that would prove it. But how? How could an old man I'd never met before yesterday know that someone was planning to trespass on my land the same night my son left town? Later that day, unable to shake my unease, I decided to do some investigating. If someone had been on my property in the middle of the night, maybe one of the neighbors had seen something. Catherine Turner lived 3 properties down County Road 47 in a tidy ranch house that her late husband had built back in the 80s. She'd been widowed for a decade now, but kept the place immaculate. I'd known Catherine since she and Harold moved in. She brought us a casserole when Barbara got sick, and another one after the funeral. She answered on my second knock. A small woman with white hair cut short and practical. Reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. "Andrew Crawford," she said, smiling. "What brings you by? Nothing wrong, I hope?" "Actually, Catherine, I was wondering if I could ask you something about last night." Her smile faded. Come in. I'll make tea." Her living room had photos of grandchildren on every surface, and a tabby cat curled on the couch. She gestured me to a chair while she disappeared into the kitchen. "Now," she said, returning with 2 cups. "What happened last night? Did you notice anything unusual? Any vehicles you didn't recognize?" She settled into her chair, studying me over her teacup. "Funny you should ask. I was up late, my hip was bothering me, and I saw a vehicle go past around 11:30, driving slow, no headlights." My pulse quickened. "No headlights?" "Well, they had them on dim, like they didn't want to wake people up. It's why I noticed. Nobody drives past here that late unless they're lost or up to something." "What kind of vehicle?" "SUV, I think. Dark color, black or dark blue, maybe? Couldn't tell you the make. They all look the same to me these days." "Did you see which way it went?" "Toward your place," she said quietly. "I watched it pass, and it didn't come back for quite a while. Hour, maybe more." She set down her teacup. "Andrew, what's going on?" "Someone was on my property last night, cut through my fence, did some digging in the garden." Her eyes widened. "That's terrible. Have you called Sheriff Hendricks?" "Not yet. I wanted to gather some information first." I leaned forward. "Catherine, I know you have that security camera by your driveway. Any chance it caught something?" "Oh." She stood immediately. You should have said. Yes, I've got one of those Ring cameras. Harold insisted we get it after there was that string of break-ins over in Douglas County. Let me check. She led me to a small desk where a laptop sat. Her fingers moved across the keyboard as she pulled up the app and scrolled back to the previous night. Here, she said, clicking on a video file. 11:17 p.m. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A dark SUV, Toyota or similar, rolled past her driveway with its lights barely on. 2 people visible in the front seats, but too dark to make out features. The vehicle moved at maybe 10 miles per hour, cautious. Can you fast forward? I asked. She clicked ahead, stopping at 12:43 a.m. The same SUV passed again, this time moving faster, headlights still dim, going the opposite direction away from my property. Can I get a copy of this? Of course, she fumbled with the controls. I think I can save it to a USB drive. Give me just a minute. While she worked, I studied the frozen frame. The angle was wrong to catch the license plate, and the image quality wasn't good enough to identify the occupants, but it was proof. Solid, time-stamped proof that someone had driven past toward my property at 11:17 p.m. and returned at 12:43 a.m. Almost exactly when those tracks must have been made. Here you go, Catherine said, handing me a small flash drive. It's all on there, Andrew. I really think you should call Frederick Hendricks. This sounds serious. I will, I assured her. Thank you, Catherine. This helps more than you know. Over the next few days, I felt myself getting weaker. It started with fatigue that I chalked up to stress. I'd wake at my usual 5:30, but getting out of bed felt like pushing through concrete. The morning chores left me winded in ways they never had before. Getting old, I told myself, though 62 had never felt like this. By the second week, new symptoms appeared. Dizziness when I stood up too fast, my heart beating irregular, like it couldn't decide on a rhythm. A tremor in my hands that made morning coffee dangerous. I dropped a mug one morning, watched it shatter on the kitchen floor, and had to sit down before cleaning it up. Alice started visiting during this time. Charles's wife, 35 years old, with her practiced smile and concerned eyes. She showed up 3 days after I'd discovered those tire tracks, carrying a casserole dish. Dad Andrew, she said at the door. She'd never called me that before. It had always been a polite Mr. Crawford. I hope you don't mind me coming by. I know things with Charles are difficult right now, but I wanted you to know I still care about you. I hesitated, but she looked so earnest standing there on my porch. Come in, I said. She set the casserole on the counter. Chicken and rice, she said. Charles's favorite. We sat at the kitchen table, and she talked about wanting to be a bridge between father and son, about how Charles was under so much stress, making bad decisions. But he still loved me, about family being more important than anything. It was a good performance. I almost believed it. She started coming by 2, sometimes 3 times a week, always bringing something. Homemade cookies one visit, soup the next, fresh bread still warm from her oven. Each time she'd sit with me for a while, asking about the farm, my health, whether I'd heard anything from any investigation. I ate what she brought because turning down food felt rude, and because some part of me wanted to believe that maybe she really did care. Maybe not everyone in Charles's life had turned against me. What I didn't notice was how the symptoms got worse after her visits, how the tremor in my hands intensified, how the dizziness came in waves that left me gripping the counter for balance. I kept taking my heart medication every morning, the same prescription I'd been on for 3 years, the little white pills in the orange bottle from Baxter's pharmacy. I trusted that bottle, trusted the system. Alice even reorganized my medicine cabinet one afternoon. So it's easier for you to find everything, Dad Andrew, she said sweetly. You know how important it is to take your heart medication every day." I thanked her for caring. God help me, I thanked her. The Robinsons noticed first. They stopped by to check the fence line between our properties, found me sitting on the porch in the middle of the afternoon. "Andrew, you feeling all right?" Mr. Robinson asked, concern creasing his weathered face. "You look pale." "Just tired," I said. "Haven't been sleeping well." Mrs. Robinson exchanged a look with her husband. "Maybe you should see Dr. Reynolds. Get yourself checked out." "I will if it doesn't get better." But I didn't go. Farmers don't go to doctors for feeling tired. We pushed through. By the end of the second week, I could barely make it through morning chores. The cattle had to wait an extra hour to be fed because I needed to rest after checking the chicken coop. My hands shook so badly I struggled to grip the rake. Catherine started checking on me daily, even called twice a day when she noticed I wasn't getting the mail until late afternoon. "Andrew, you really don't look well," she said one afternoon, finding me struggling to lift a feed bag. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" "Alice brought soup yesterday." Her expression sharpened. "Charles's wife. She's been coming around? Couple times a week. Says she wants to help mend things between me and Charles." Catherine's mouth pressed into a thin line. "And you believe her?" I don't know what I believe anymore. She helped me load the feed bag, then stood there with her hands on her hips. "You need to see a doctor. This isn't just stress, Andrew. Something's wrong." 3 weeks after I'd discovered those tire tracks, I collapsed in the barn while feeding the cattle. I don't remember much about the collapse itself. One moment I was pouring feed into the trough, watching steam rise from the cattle's breath in the cold morning air. The next, my vision blurred, my legs buckled, and the ground rushed up to meet me. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at ceiling tiles and fluorescent lights. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled my ears. My mouth was dry, my arms felt heavy, and there was an IV line taped to my hand. "Mr. Crawford?" A woman's voice, calm and professional. "Can you hear me?" I turned my head slowly. A doctor in a white coat stood beside my bed, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds. "What happened?" My voice came out rough. "You collapsed," she said gently. "Your neighbor found you in your barn and called 911. You've been unconscious for about 2 hours. 2 hours. I tried to sit up, but she placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Easy. You need to rest. We've been running tests and found something concerning." She pulled up a chair, her expression serious. "Mr. Crawford, your blood work shows dangerously high levels of digitoxin. Your serum concentration is at 4.2 nanograms per milliliter. The therapeutic range is 0.5 to 2. You're well into toxic territory." "Digitoxin?" I frowned. "I don't take that." "I know. That's what concerns me. According to your medical records, you take atenolol for blood pressure. Digitoxin is much stronger and more dangerous. At the levels in your system, you could have had a fatal arrhythmia." The barn, the collapse, Alice's visits. I saw her face in my mind, the way she'd smiled when she organized my medication cabinet. "Someone gave you medicine you shouldn't have been taking," Dr. Reynolds continued. "Either someone made a serious error, or someone deliberately substituted your medication." 20 minutes later, Sheriff Frederick Hendricks walked through the door. I'd known him for 15 years, served on the county agriculture board together. "Who's had access to your house?" Hendricks asked after Dr. Reynolds explained the situation. "Alice," I said quietly. "Charles's wife. She's been coming by 2 or 3 times a week, bringing food, checking on me. She reorganized my medicine cabinet about 10 days ago." Hendricks wrote that down. "Anyone else?" "Catherine stopped by once, but Alice is the only one who came inside regularly. She knew exactly where I kept my pills. By late afternoon, Hendricks returned with evidence bags. We opened the bottle and examined the pills. Most are atenolol, your regular medication, but about a third are digitoxin. Someone mixed them together. He held up the bag so I could see. We counted 42 pills total. 14 of them are digitoxin. Those little white pills looked so harmless. But 1 in 3 had been slowly killing me. We found 2 sets of fingerprints, Hendricks continued. Yours, obviously, and 1 other set. We'll run those through the system, but given what you've told me about Alice's access, I think we both know whose prints those are. 2 days later, Hendricks called with news. They'd arrested Alice, found digitoxin tablets in her car, still in pharmacy packaging. But that wasn't all. In her center console, they found a small spiral notebook with entries like, November 2nd, added 3 more pills. He didn't notice. And November 5th, he's getting weaker. Won't be long now. Charles called me that afternoon, his voice explosive. This is insane. Alice would never do something like this. Someone planted that stuff in her car. The only mistake, I said quietly, was mine for trusting you. I hung up. But that wasn't the end. 3 days later, Hendricks called with disturbing news. We've been monitoring Charles's movements. Last night he met with a man named Eugene Grayson, mid-level dealer out of Kansas City. Eugene Grayson. The name meant nothing to me initially, but Hendricks continued. We got an anonymous tip about a plan to plant drugs on your property tonight, substantial enough to frame you for distribution. Think about it. You're pressing charges for attempted murder. If you suddenly get arrested for drug trafficking, your credibility is destroyed. That night, Hendricks arrived with 2 deputies for a stakeout. We sat in my dark kitchen, watching the security monitors I'd installed after the first break-in. At 12:40 a.m., Charles's silver sedan rolled down my driveway with headlights off. Hold position, Hendricks whispered into his radio as we watched Charles dig a hole in my back garden and bury 5 packages of methamphetamine. Let him finish. When the floodlights burst on, Charles froze like a deer. Deputies rushed in with weapons drawn. Within minutes, they had him in handcuffs, the bags of drugs laid out in evidence. Through the radio, I heard my son confess everything. The $50,000 gambling debt to dangerous people in Kansas City. The plan to frame me so he could claim the farm through a forged power of attorney he'd been working on. Alice's role in the poisoning to speed things up. 1 month later, I sat in Douglas County Courthouse watching Charles receive 15 years in federal prison. Alice got 8 years, but I still had questions about Daniel Grayson. After the trial, I returned to Baxter's pharmacy. Dorothy remembered Daniel but hadn't seen him lately. The older pharmacist, Florence, overheard. You're asking about Daniel Grayson? She said gently. He lost his son to drugs. Eugene Grayson. Daniel tried everything to save that boy, but Eugene ended up dealing to support his habit. Eugene Grayson. The dealer who supplied Charles. I found Daniel at Maple Grove Trailer Park, Unit 47. He opened the door as if he'd been expecting me. Andrew Crawford, he said quietly. I've been waiting for you. Inside his small home, photographs lined one wall. A smiling boy on a bicycle, the same boy in a graduation gown. Then nothing, as if time itself had ended. You saved my life, I said over coffee. How did you know? Daniel stared into his cup. Eugene called me late one night, drunk, bragging about a big score. Some desperate farmer's son who wanted to frame his own father. He mentioned your farm, your name. When I saw you in the pharmacy, I knew. He looked at me with tired eyes. I had to warn you, even if it meant turning in my own boy. You called the sheriff? Anonymously. I gave them enough information to set up surveillance. There was something else in his expression, something deeper. There's more, I said. Daniel nodded slowly and pulled out an old photograph. A young man in army fatigues standing in front of a helicopter. I had a brother, Patrick Grayson. He enlisted in 1968, deployed to Vietnam in 1970. On May 14, 1970, his platoon walked into an ambush near the Cambodian border. Patrick went back for the wounded, pulled out 4 men under heavy fire. Then he went back for the last one, a 19-year-old private from Kansas named Andrew Hartman. The room tilted. Andrew Hartman was my birth name. Patrick threw himself on a grenade to save you and 5 other men, Daniel said gently. When I saw your name at the pharmacy, I went home and checked Patrick's file. There you were, 50 years later, still alive because my brother died for you. I couldn't let his sacrifice be for nothing. We embraced, 2 old men holding each other up, crying for brothers we'd lost and sons we'd failed. 6 months later, on a warm September morning, I stood on my porch watching the sunrise. But this time I wasn't alone. Daniel emerged from the guest cottage I'd renovated over the summer. We had breakfast together, talking about Patrick and Barbara, about the farm work ahead. I'd visited Charles once at Leavenworth. He cried and apologized desperately. I forgive you, I told him, and I meant it. Use this time to become better. The door's open, just a crack. The rest is up to you. My will was updated. The property would go to a veterans charity when I passed. I'd also established the Patrick Grayson Memorial Scholarship Fund for children of veterans who needed help with college. That evening, as autumn leaves drifted down covering the garden, Daniel looked at the gathering leaves and smiled. Should we rake those up? He asked. I laughed, really laughed, deep and genuine. Not yet. Let them lie there a while longer. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt peace. Sometimes the family that saves you isn't the one you were born into, and sometimes a stranger's act of courage echoes across 50 years to save your life when you need it most.